Hello, I'm Mark Arnold from Urban Saints, and we've been exploring the world of disability equality. And in this final video, we're going to be unpacking the 5 steps to disability legislation compliance. What are the 5 things that we can do that will make sure that we are in a good place when it comes to understanding and putting into practice the various elements of the Equality Act of 2010. There are lots of different places that we could start when thinking about how to be compliant in this area of disability legislation. But probably the best place to start is to have somebody that owns this within the organisation. Having somebody who is the inclusion champion, who carries this as a compliance area and who works to ensure that the things that we do as an organisation are meeting the requirements of the Equality Act 2010. Having somebody as an inclusion champion ensures that disability equality, and indeed equality across all of the protected characteristics, is taken seriously at every level and right the way through the life of the organisation. It's very easy for new things to come in and to sort of take some of the profile and the attention away, and there's always something else that's coming in to take that attention away from us. We've many of us been grappling with GDPR over the last year or two, and there's been a lot of time and energy spent on that, for example, and there'll be something else that comes down the road soon. But having somebody who owns inclusion as your inclusion champion means that there's always that sense of inclusion being on the radar, and somebody who's looking out for people who particularly fall within those 9 protected characteristics to enable everybody to be included. Lots of ways that can look, and certainly in my own context as a children's and youth worker, I've seen that very effectively done in church. I remember a church where there was a very busy, lively city church. Lots of people turning up to the 10 o'clock service on a Sunday morning, and they served refreshments to people when they arrived. And so the entrance area to the church at just before 10 o'clock was absolutely heaving with people. There were lots of sights and smells and all sorts of things going on in that environment. And that would be when a family would arrive with their young autistic boy. And he would immediately walk into all of that sensory overload and find it incredibly hard. Now, they had an inclusion champion within their church, and the inclusion champion, spotting that this was hard for this lad every week, got alongside the family and the boy himself and put in place some provisions to enable them to access church in a much more friendly way and inclusive way for them. It was done in cooperation with them, and this is really important when thinking about what this looks like in your own context. Don't do equality unto people, do it with them. If you have people in your team who have a disability, involve them in this process. If you have customers or suppliers or visitors to your business who are disabled, then encourage them to help you to put in place things that will help them. And it's much better when that's done in a collaborative way. The boy and his family at church now arrive a couple of minutes after the church services started. They're still greeted as they arrive, they get their refreshments, but they're not walking into that wall of noise and sights and sounds. They go through into an area of the church where there's a quiet spot for them to be able to settle as a family. And there are some things for the lad to do to help him to be able to focus and engage. Life's a lot better for them at church now, and that's because with the inclusion champion there, they were able to put things in place that really made a difference for them. Have a look at what those sorts of things look like for you, and go on that journey with folk that you know in your environment who have a disability or additional need. Help them to be a part of that process. There's a phrase that gets used quite a bit in the disability community, and it's nothing about me without me. Nothing about me without me. Really important phrase to hear, isn't it? Because it's about ensuring that we do things as partners alongside people that have disabilities and additional needs. And we're much less likely to make mistakes, and we're much more likely to be effectively including people and preventing discrimination if we do that. When we've got that person in place and we're starting to think more about the things that we do and the environment that we're in, start to list all the ways in which disability legislation might apply for you in your setting. Think about, do you employ people? Do you have volunteers? Are you a membership organisation? Do you supply products or services or activities? All kinds of different ways in which we fall under the Equality Act and the provisions therein, and therefore thinking of all of those different aspects of our organisation, listing them out, making sure that we think of all the different things that we do is a good first starting point. Then when we've got that list, we can start to consider all of the people that might engage with in some way some of those things that we do. Now that could be members of our team, our staff team, volunteers, customers, suppliers, a whole range of folk. If we're working in a school, it might be pupils. Lots of different environments in which we engage with people. What are the different ways in which different categories of people engage with the things that you do in your organisation? It'd be really helpful then to list those people alongside the list of things that you do as an organisation. When you've got all of that, you can start to then identify some of the barriers that those people might experience. So you've got a list of the things that you do, you've got a list of the people that you're in contact with. Bringing those together starts to identify what some of those barriers might be. Might be helpful to do a bit of an audit of your premises, go for a wander around, see if there are some physical barriers there. It'd be really helpful to talk to anybody that you have in your team who's got a disability to see if they can help you to identify some of those barriers, both the physical barriers and maybe other more cultural barriers that can exist within your organisation as well. As a team, you could then start to think about how you could make some reasonable adjustments that would start to remove some of those barriers that get in the way of people being able to actively engage in the things that you do. So you know the things that you do, you know the people that you engage with, you've started to identify some of the barriers that exist, and now you can start to look at what some of those reasonable adjustments can be that can remove some of those barriers and help everybody to be able to engage. As you do that, document everything. Make sure that you write down all the barriers that you've identified and write down what you've done to remove them where possible and make reasonable adjustments. If you've not been able to fully remove a barrier, or if you've not been able to adjust it at all, then document why. Identify why you were unable to reasonably adjust that particular barrier and perhaps identify what the other areas of compliance were that prevented you from doing so. Keep a record of your audit and maybe update it annually, sooner than that if you can, but certainly annually, so that you've got a regular check of the things that you're doing, the people you engage with, the barriers that could possibly be in place, and what you're doing as an organisation to remove those. As I mentioned in a previous video, we have an anticipatory duty to put measures in place to remove barriers to inclusion and to ensure that everybody can access the things we're doing and not be discriminated against. And that anticipatory duty falls within what we're looking at here. If we can demonstrate that we have thought about the various barriers that exist and put in place what reasonable adjustments we can, and have identified why we can't, if there are some of those areas that we can't do anything about, then we will have met our anticipatory duty in ensuring that we have complied as fully as possible with the provisions of the Equality Act of 2010. If you're stuck with any of this, do seek specialist advice. It's much better to get this right now than it is to wait until something's gone wrong and then somebody's coming after you. You only need to do a few Google searches to see that there are plenty of cases that have been brought against organisations citing disability discrimination and other forms of discrimination under the Equality Act of 2010. So it's well worth taking the time now to put these things in place and to seek the extra support and help you need to enable that to happen than it is to wait for it all to go wrong and be regretting that you didn't do it sooner. I hope it goes well, and this is the final video in our series about disability equality. I hope they've been helpful for you.